Hi, everybody, and welcome to our first lunchtime webinar of this semester. I'm Dr. Anna Stur, and I'm the director of the Center for South Asian Studies. And along with our GA, Saloni Mahajan, we are very, very pleased to welcome Nilosree Biswas, who is going to talk about her book, Calcutta On Your Plate, today. So I'm just going to give a little introduction, and then we'll go straight to Nilosree and her discussion of her book. Nilosree Biswas is an author and filmmaker trained in comparative literature and later in cinema. She writes about history, especially colonial Bengal and pre-modern India, along with culture, art history, food, and the cinema of South Asia. And these areas of interests often show up in her national and international columns that she writes. And her most recent book, which we're going to hear about today, is Calcutta On Your Plate. It talks of the foodscape as an incredible journey of tastes, innovations, acceptance, indulgences, and celebrations in Calcutta. Her earlier books include Banaras, Of Gods, Humans, and Stories, and Alluring Kashmir, The Inner Spirit, which is co-written with Irfan Nabi. Nilosree is also a filmmaker, and 2 decades of film work have earned her awards like Best Documentary at the New York Film Festival, and her documentaries have screened at places like Cannes and been archived at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in LA. She is currently working on her next book, with themes like this one related to colonial Bengal, and she spends her time between Bombay and Philadelphia. So now let's hear from Nilosree about Calcutta On Your Plate. So she's going to talk, and then I'll start off the questioning, and then we hope to hear questions from all of our audience members. So welcome once again to all of you and to Nilosree, and I look forward to hearing everything that you have to say. And here you are, Nilosree.
Hi, Anna, and it's absolutely a pleasure having everyone. Thank you so much for having me. At the moment, I am in a very cold, wet, gray Philadelphia, trying to warm up myself, talking about food of my home, Kolkata. And I will be sharing a little bit about how this book had come about and my connect with the food of the city and also its historical influences of what we know today as Bengali food. I think what would be interesting here to start off is that Bengali or Bangla is the 5th most spoken language across the world. Worldwide, hundreds and thousands and millions of people speak this language. So one can assume that wherever this language is spoken, in bits and pieces of the culinary culture has also traveled. Apart from its home base, which is West Bengal and Bangladesh, earlier undivided Bengal before 1947, and I think this food is now a part of the huge diaspora across the world, in the US, all over Europe, Australia, and in several places across the world. And I think many of them would have memories of the food that they have ate or they have tasted as a child or as a young adult before they actually left their home city or home state or wherever they were. Or even if the families who are second generation or third generation diaspora, they do have a recall and recollection of a kind of Bengali food that the elders in the family may have consumed when they were young. So Bengali food, what we know of today, is from it's the way it is right now. I would say that it has taken nearly 250 years, or at the best 300 years, to for the food to shape the way we know it today. And in this shaping up, in this wonderful and most colorful cuisines I have come across, because I myself, I'm a foodie. So I keep trying and tasting new food. But Bengali food is very colorful as well. This whole colorful cuisine has been shaped up by various influences. Often what we don't know, or we consciously don't remember the little and the large anecdotes of history associated to it. So this book, Calcutta On Your Plate, is a journey into knowing the history of this food, knowing how all of this were put together one day over centuries to shape up what is called Amader Khabar, which in Bangla means our food. So I think I would love to share with the audience here how this book came about, and a little bit about my connect with the city and my food. Because when you write about something which you have grown up with, often, it could be a culture, a custom, what you eat, the festivities in your region, that you may not take into account the backstories of them. So my own connect with my local food, the home food that I have consumed all my life, till the time I left the city, which is in early 90s, mid 90s, is as somebody who has been raised in 80s of Kolkata, I had the privilege and the freedom of being a little bit of carefree, moving around across the city as a young adult, and thereby visiting several eateries and several street food vendors. So my own understanding of my local food has happened in multiple levels. One, from my own family kitchen, and from my relatives, and from my social circle. The other direct interest comes from the plethora of street food which was available in Kolkata, in the streets of Calcutta. Now it's Kolkata, erstwhile it was Calcutta, and trying and testing them absolutely without any second thought. And that is exactly how, as a young university student, and the food had left an impression on me. So once I finished my earlier book, Banaras of Gods, Humans and Stories, which is a very different kind of book. It is a very heavy book in the sense it is about a very large and very old city. So it is a project which took a lot of my time and my colleague Irfan Nabi's time, who has stupendously photographed Banaras. Unfortunately, this book holds only few of his photographs, but I am told that they are equally enticing because many people have felt hungry by seeing the photographs. So I would give him a huge credit to that. But going back to what I was saying, that after I finished writing that book in 2021, when it got published, I wanted to really go into a little bit of a lighter space of something more sensory to work on. And I thought that this is a good time to start working on colonial Bengal, all beyond my columns and beyond my, I would say beyond my journal writing, etc., and to give it a shape of a book. And the entry point of food was it worked very well for me. I thought, if you talk about a culture and a history, what good would it be than to start with a food venture, like step into the world of the food and thereby go through the narrative of food and actually also talk about the city's growth, how it grew as a colonial city and how it was the first capital of the British Empire. And that was the idea behind the book. And I think I have tried to tell my readers that food is integrally related to the cultural history of a place, and that people, various kinds of people, have contributed to Bengali food. And I have gone into several milestones of influences, including the British influence, which is a very primary influence. And almost everybody worldwide who has ever had a Bengali meal would know that we are extremely fond of sweets. I mean, from us, we have India's most famous cultural export, food cultural export, Rasgulla, which is the casein-based roundish mound dipped in sugar syrup. And I am 100% sure that whoever has ever visited India, at some point, he or she or they have had a chance to have a bite of this very, very sweet meat, what they used to call at that point of time, which originated from Bengal. Although Orissa people do also have a claim on it. That's a matter of debate, which I'm not going to go, which I'm really not going to go in this discussion. I'm of course going to tell my reason why I think that Bengal has a contribution to the discovery and the invention of that sweet. So I think I would talk a little about the book. The book is available. Let me show you the book. Oh, the book is available in United States as well as Canada, and globally it is available across the Amazon. And so you can get hold of a copy if you wish to. Oh, and it is also available in a Kindle format. So you can opt for the Kindle format if you like to read something via Kindle. I am an old school person, so I am favorable to books in their hard form. But let me kind of take you through the basic narrative of the book, the way it goes out. The book talks about how Calcutta was established as a trade post, how it was established as a trade post, and how it grows. It takes a deep dive into the association of the locals, the baboos, who's the elite Bengalis, the affluent Bengalis, and their business-wise transaction with the Europeans at that point of time, and the social engagement which leads them to be curious about this food. And then, of course, there are other factors which joins the whole narrative of food, and it is something which I would say it's like a palimpsest. It keeps building from one. I mean, it's like a layer. But if we are to put the 1690 as a timeline date for the beginning of the city, when Job Chanak, the East India Company agent, decided to kind of zero in on Kolkata, which was actually a small little really, I mean, you could have ignored that village at the end of the Gangetic flow, I mean, near River Hooghly, besides River Hooghly, along with two other villages. When he zeroes in to make a trade post there, he had his own reasons why he chose that. He found the location extremely, I would say, advantageous for the British East India Company. In comparison to the other VOCs which were operating as trading entities, the Dutch VOC and the French VOC. So he wanted to be in a more advantageous position, and he wanted to kind of be in a strategic place from where his ships could come in and go out. So he chose the spot, and over a period of time, the city started growing. And once the city was developing, once the city was expanding, the landed gentry of Bengal, a large section of them started moving in to Kolkata, and they thought that it would be great to be based in Kolkata so that they have engagement, a transaction, a business-wise interaction with the East India Company and with the other European trade entities which were working at that point of time. So what became a social engagement, what started as a social engagement, it's extremely fascinating to see how the social engagement slowly gets into the everyday life of affluent Bengalis, those who wanted to experiment, those who wanted to know why the Europeans love their food, whatever they ate, the chicken roast and the meat and the several kind of amazing puddings and desserts, everything interested them. And because there was embargoes of meat in Hindu households at that point of time, so many of them would decide to go on these dinner parties where they were invited and taste the delicious non-vegetarian food, which normally they wouldn't have an access at their home level. So that was the secret adventure which began, but it never remained a secret because more and more people were drawn into the food influences by the Europeans, by the British, and then there were the Portuguese who were the earlier inhabitants of Bengal. They settled in Bengal ahead of the British. They were given permission to trade by the Mughal emperors. In fact, they were there from a little up from Akbar's time itself, and they were based away from the present-day Kolkata, in the district called Hooghly, in a place in towns called Bandel and Chandannagar, Bandel and other places at that point of time. And they influenced us in how to curdle the milk and come up with casein and cottage cheese, which is the base ingredient of this vast range of Bengali sweets or mishti. I think one of our audience here had already typed in the box, and mishti is absolutely an integral part. We are not diabetic people. Well, we don't have blood sugar so much, but we are fond of mishti, and we are fond of anything which is sweet. And then, of course, came in the very big influence of tea. The first round of habitual tea drinking began from Kolkata because the tea plantations were started by the British in Assam and in Upper Bengal in Darjeeling. So we have the famous Darjeeling tea. And once that came, along with that came in the culture of snacking and the culture of having a little bit of the little savories which go on with a tea session. The whole idea of afternoon tea session was an influence from the foreigners, from the Europeans who came to settle there, who came to work there, and those afternoon sessions resulted in the cafe culture of the city. They led to the opening of tea rooms. In fact, the first and one of the most early and prominent tea rooms is located in the huge, beautiful stadium of Eden Gardens, where often cricket is being played. It was designed and made to come into a shape by Emily Eden, sister of one of the viceroys. At that point of time, it was a refreshment room for the British to step out, go for a walk, have their cup of tea. And similarly, over years, more cafes started opening up in Kolkata. That's one aspect of our story. And then enters a man from the northern part of the country whose name is Nawab Wajid Ali Shah. He was a person who used to be seated in the province of Oudh, and his seat of activities was present in Lucknow. And from there, he was on a tour headed off to England and to put to be in conversation, to be in a meeting with the Queen of England. He had his own political discussions to be had, but at that point of time, he had to detour because he was detained by the British colonial government, and he was held behind the bars, kept in detainment in the Fort William, which is the fort of Kolkata, and once he was released from there, being banished from his own seat of kingdom, Calcutta became his what would I say? I mean, his refuge, his second Lucknow. And in fact, he was such an amazing personality. He was so high on fine tastes that as soon as he was given a house to stay, he decided, I'm going to recreate Lucknow. I'm not going to let Lucknow go away from me. And what he did is that he got at least 600 to 700 people to be around him. And I was just sharing this with Anna. A large percentage of his staff was who held his kitchen. He was a great foodie. He was a connoisseur of food. So a large number of gourmet chefs, khansamas, bawarchis, all of them had come. And the other section of the people who came with him and joined him in Kolkata is his lovely team of musicians, poets, dancers, with whom he had lived a very engaging life when he was in Lucknow. So he recreated that world of fine taste in Kolkata. And I mentioned in the book, in Rosaline Thomas's The Last King of India, she mentions, and also Abdul Halim Sharar, who was the official chronicler of the Nawab, who is often addressed as the last king of India, is because he had to leave Lucknow before 1857, which is the first war of independence, which is counted as the first war of independence at this point of time. And he came here, and once he landed here in a place in the western part of the city called Matia Buruj, which in Bangla would mean in a mud fort, a fort made of mud. And in couple of months, he just simply made it into Lucknow. Everything he changed. He changed the house where he was allotted to live, the rented house, and he changed the streets, he changed the locality. He just made it into a miniature version of Lucknow, where he used to be based. And in all of that, he began to replicate the food which was consumed in Lucknow. And in this, Calcutta got its most beloved food, which is biryani, the Calcutta type biryani. And the legend goes that there was an inclusion. Normally, biryani, how we know it in Delhi, in Hyderabad, in Rampur, in other provincial areas of earlier India, pre-modern India, we do not see the presence of a potato. But in Kolkata biryani, you have to have a chunky, creamy, round potato, which must make itself very visible. And I have seen people saying, oh my God, I'm not seeing my potato. Get me an extra potato. I'll pay for it. So that's how we love our potato. But this potato has a story, and it is an introduction. It had come to India via the Portuguese in the 16th century at some point, but it was popularized by the British officials, by the British administration, and the new set of vegetables, what seems integral to Indian cooking today. Many of them don't even belong to India, including the potato and the green chili, which is so a commonplace thing in anything that you possibly can imagine as a food of India. And of course, the tomato, that also came to India from South America. So having said that, this is the story that I tell. I also talk about the women of Kolkata who finally approved and who finally joined their hands in taking these influences into the very micro level, everyday cooking. And that's how by the turn of 20th century, by the turn of roughly around 1950s and 60s, we were getting the imprints of the present-day food of Kolkata and the Bengalis. And today, what we have on our plate is a lot of acknowledgement had to be made from various sources. Oh, I must, before I would wrap up my little bit of talking, is I must acknowledge that other than biryani, we have a very big favorite, which is the noodles, the Chinese noodles and the Chinese, Indian Chinese food, which came to us, but that's another long story, another discussion. We also have some huge Jewish influences in our bakery. We have Armenian influences, and I hope to work on these influences in another project someday, hopefully, God willing. And so this is a celebration. This is a story of acceptance. This is a story of cross-pollination, and this is a story of how various sets of people will start getting together over food. So this is the subject of this 190 grams book, which is content-wise more than 190 grams. And I hope you will get hold of your copies and you will go through. You can drop a review on Amazon. You can write to me on Twitter, and I'm all there, and I'm up for any food discussion, any food questions that you might have here and in future also.
Thanks so much, Nilosree. You're talking about 190 grams. I can guarantee if any of us began eating all of the delicacies that we see here, we're going to be dealing with a lot more than 190 grams.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's a mouth-watering book, and it's also a book of fascinating history. So thank you so much for going through some of the things that you discuss. And now, if you don't mind, I have some questions for you about some of the things that you kind of tantalized us with, and maybe you could go into them a little bit more.
Oh, yes. I'm most happy. Okay. Go ahead.
I'm gonna start with an easy one that maybe all of us are wondering. You talked about you're from there, and you've written this book partially because you wanted to learn more about the histories of your own comfort foods and the things that you associate with your home city and being Bengali. So what are the foods that come to mind for you as your very own comfort foods?
I think as a Bengali, I am, I mean, with each passing day, I am becoming more Bengali in the sense my affinity for rice and fish curry is increasing by leaps and bounds. And also the second comfort food is, of course, that potato-laden mutton biryani, which Nawab Wajid Ali Shah had left for us. I mean, his kitchen came up with the idea of the biryani. So, of course, I'm sure that even in Philadelphia, if someone would send me a text saying, okay, there's a real Kolkata biryani somewhere in Philadelphia, I wouldn't mind to step out impromptu for a quick tasting of the same. So such is my connect with the biryani and the fish and curry. Although there are some amazing comfort food, there are some unbelievably tasty and delicious vegetarian dishes, which I really love, which because I would also hear mention that Calcutta is a very humid place. Most of the year, the weather is very hot and humid. So we as much as we love our fish, and every meal possibly has fish in some form or the other, we also have a vast variety of vegetarian food which suits the weather, which suits the geographical requirement, the climatic kind of it syncs with the climate, and and many of them are coolants to the body, which we prepare in summer, and which we include. We also, with the new vegetables which came into our lives, we like tomato, we did fantastic conversions with them. We use the tomato as as a very lovable form of a chutney, which is a thicker, a jelly version. And since you have so frequented South Asia and Nepal, you would know chutney, how it is. It's thicker in its consistency, and we would put in some dates and some raisins. And while I was growing up, every wedding which had traditional food would end up with this tomato and date chutney before we moved on to the last batch of infinite number of sweets. I mean, it depended on the affordability of the host and also from which class and caste people were coming. But tomato chutney made its way bang in. I mean, considering tomato just landed in our lives to hardly 200 or 250 years ago, the popularity it has attained not only in Bengali food, but in food of Western India, including Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka. It's used in the sambar. It's all over the place. It's unbelievable. It wasn't there at all. Well, in India's such a long history of food, it just it conquered us. Tomato conquered us.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. I see a comment from Lalita, who is visiting us from California, in the chat, that she's thanking you, Nilosree, for this talk. And
I wish, Lalita, you could have stayed. I would have loved for you to stay, but no worries. This is going to be on record, so you can, of course, listen to the rest of it on the YouTube channel of the university.
Yeah, okay, so many other questions. Thanks so much for that. Marufa Brian has put a question in the chat, which is, what would be a typical menu for food for a typical day of Bengali food? And I think you've kind of answered that. I think we can also surmise that this would differ by season, by class, by religion, by caste, and many things. But would you like to give a succinct answer to that one, if possible?
Yeah, if I were to quickly make a little menu for Marufa, a sample menu for Marufa, I would say that every Bengali meal must start with bhat, which is the steamed rice, and then we have a pattern of eating. Our servings are one after the other. We do not have, usually we do not have everything at one go. So the first round of things that we might eat are little bitter stuff, little bit of neem leaves fried with small pieces of eggplant, a typical recipe for scorching month of May, which we call neem begun. We do not have the culture of bread as such. Bread is not very much there. Deep fried bread, which is puri, the luchi, which is the counterpart of puri and which is made with maida, which is the all-purpose flour, is a Sunday breakfast menu for us. Otherwise, the lunch and the dinner menus will have a packed-in pack-in of a dal, a nice dal, some vegetables, and of course, fried fish. And if you are going for a more celebratory kind of a meal, of course, there will be mutton, chicken, various versions of that and various forms. We were influenced from the Mughal cooking. So there was korma, kalia, which are all originally found in Mughlai dishes. A loose term, Mughlai is a loose term, of course, and we would have them on a more celebratory meals, variations of that, which are thick gravies, to say. And then she also is asking me whether we are fond of paratha and roti. Listen, yesterday only I was talking to someone, and roti is a matter of constraint for us. Roti indicates constraint, and rice is equal to abundance for us. Roti came into our lives it didn't come to our lives before 20th century. Once the flour mills started coming in due to colonial expansion and industrialization, roti came into our everyday life much, much later. Of course, we had paratha. Of course, we have puris also, but those are not our priority. We are there's a colloquial term which I'm going to use for the Bengalis. We are bhetos. Bheto means somebody who is dependent on bhat or rice.
Thank you. Yes, the Nepali equivalent would be bhate. And
yes, they are also very close to us.
Where people are going around saying, like, tag your bhate friends. Delicious meal, which I've just posted about. So, okay, moving away from the Instagram age, you were just speaking about Mughlai cuisine, and you told me that the exiled Nawab of Lucknow is one of your favorite characters in this history. So one of the things that fascinates me and Saloni as scholars of performance is this history where he brings this giant kitchen staff along with this giant performing staff together. So could you tell us a little bit more about the environment that he was creating of luxury, where food and music and dance and poetry were emblematic of Lucknow for him, and how that brought the Bengalis, all the curious Bengalis and other maybe British people, other foreigners, into a different kind of cosmopolitan setting?
I think it's a very interesting question, and I would like to say, even to begin, Wajid Ali Shah represents two things for me. He represents fine tastes. He was a connoisseur of finer things of life, which includes music, food. He had his own zoo. He was fond of several things which may sound fairly quirky at this point of time. And the other thing which he represents for me is consumption, luxurious consumption of several things. So when he was ousted from Lucknow, which is really not a very light incident in the history of colonized India, which is one of the most important and one of the most critical and the dark moments of India's colonization. And he had to come to Kolkata because he was about to go to make an appeal to the Queen in England about the annexation which Outram was initiating on the part of the British administration, raise a complaint. He hoped to reach there, but unfortunately he fell unwell and was forced to kind of detour to Kolkata. That is when he was taken into captivity and detained in Fort William. After several months of detainment, when he was released and when they have already taken away his kingdom, he realized that he won't be able to return to Lucknow. It is at this point of time that he decides to recreate a miniature Lucknow, which I have already mentioned. But the fact is, such was the magnanimity of the man that despite being banished, he was very high on life. So obviously he was somebody who was troubling the colonizers, troubling the British administration, because they had to pay him a certain stipend annually, and he was always running out of money because he had a large family, he had Muta wives, he had a huge system to maintain. But at the same time, quite a few things was happening. His presence in Calcutta indulged and pumped up the whole atmosphere of majlis and music and dance, which in any case, the baboos of Kolkata were already, he had taken an interest, but his presence made the Matya Buruj area a replica of, how can I describe it? It's like if we were to imagine how Andalusia would be in the peak of Islamic golden period, or maybe how Baghdad would be in a certain point of time. His Matya Buruj, his Khidirpur area, its present-day Khidirpur area, was a replica of a shining, small little neighborhood, which was high on life. You would have recitals happening. You would have dramatic enactment of Ras Leela. He was an extremely, in this context, I must share with the audience here that he was a very, very syncretic guy. He was although he was a Muslim, he played the role of Lord Krishna in the different mythological narratives which is around the Hindu god, which includes the replication of the love stories between Radha Krishna and the dramatization of it. He used to adorn the role of Lord Krishna, and you can see him doing that in the cinematic version of his life made by the famous Indian filmmaker Satyajit Ray in his film Satranj Ke Khiladi. You will see him playing out the role of Lord Krishna. So I think this whole thing, this whole idea of having a very fine, culturally nuanced life also meant that the Lucknow food culture would prevail at the same time. And the Lucknow food culture was about artistry. It was more than gastronomy, considered as a form of artistry in food. It was a representation of the Lucknow Nawabs, and it's absolutely fascinating the amount of money and manpower that went into the kitchens of Lucknow, which when Wajid Ali Shah moved to Kolkata, was settled in Kolkata, it replicated itself. And so this whole thing also, I must say that this whole thing of potato has two school of thought. One school of thought says that because the Nawab was, the pocket was actually very, very deep, and he was running out of his money, and he was feeling inadequate. He had inadequate financial situation at that point of time. So potato was alternative to the meat, to the expense of everyday meat that he needed for his meal. I don't agree with it. I agree with the in fact, I believe, and I have its evidences, that he was a very, very experimental person. As a personality, he had his side, he had a facet of a personality which wanted to experiment things. One of the examples which I have given in the book is that once he had invited another prince or another royalty from Delhi in Lucknow, while he was in Lucknow. And because he was a quirky and he was a guy who wanted to experiment, he served a multi 7-course or a humongous meal, to put it. And it was found that everything was made of sugar. That was the kind of quirk and prank he played on. So I would really not believe that he was running short of money and somebody convinced him to use potato. That's not the case. In my understanding, he allowed his gourmet chefs or the rakabdars to include the experimentation of using a potato in his everyday rice mutton combo meal, which he used to have. And that's how we get biryani. So this is one aspect. And at the same time, till the time he was there, till the time he was leaving, he never ever abandoned music. Music and dance was a part of his life. It was an integral part of his life. And there were very many tawaifs who had specially traveled from Lucknow to Kolkata to be with him, because he was known as a very benevolent patron. He was a great supporter of the musicians and he used to host them. And so there were very famous tawaifs of Lucknow who actually decided to move out of Lucknow and be with him so that they can continue their musical careers.
And then the atmosphere of Calcutta was changed with all of this as a draw for other curious people who you talk about, right? So all of these people who are foreigners who are coming are interested in visiting these places. And
absolutely. Northern part of the city, where the local Bengalis were usually based, the present-day northern part of the city, where the hubs where very well-known Bengali families were based, and they used to travel all the way, and there were this whole culture of concerts taking place while he was there. It is, you may say, he played a huge shadow influence. His presence encouraged others to host large-scale concerts. His presence made those elite baboos or Bengali bhadraloks to call for tawaifs from different parts of the country. There are evidences that even in Durga Puja, which is the biggest festivity of Bengal, there was one performance by the tawaifs, which the colonial, in fact, yesterday, before I forget, I must share a little snippet of what happened yesterday on Twitter. I posted about a woman entertainer, a woman performer, a tawaif, and I actually recently have come across a very derogatory term of bazaar woman, addressed by the early photographers who were photographing India at that point of time. So I think in similar connotation, the Nach girl or the Nach is, of course, dance, which we already know, and it becomes distorted, and the word tawaif, if goes out, and the word tawaif goes out, I would like to go on record. It was somewhat a stubbornness of the colonizers not to use something which was already Mughal, because there was a political strife going on, and my own understanding is at an initial stage, there was a lot of white Mughals, people like James Skinner and everybody who wanted to adopt a very Mughal and a very Eastern kind of a lifestyle. And then when the discarding became rampant, people were doing away with everything that a Mughal way of life represented. So the word tawaif was very, very less used at the later part of the colonial rule. And these kind of terms like dancing girls or nautch girls and bazaar women, they came in and utterly derogatory, utterly pejorative. And I think also it made people understand that tawaifs were actually prostitutes, which is not the case. We have a huge body of scholarship, including Veena Oldenburg's writing on the tawaifs, and we see how powerful, how refined, how beautiful, and how full of talent this set of women were. And I think these tawaif, Calcutta had a huge kind of atmosphere where tawaifs could present, and the baboos also could invite them to perform during the Durga Pujas. So all of this was something very, very prevalent when Wajid Ali Shah was there. So his is a kind of a shadow influence. If you are at one corner and you are an influential entity, so even if you don't actively participate in every event that is happening in the city, but your presence is good enough to give rise to such enthusiasm that Calcutta became a very important site of Hindustani classical music. It did become.
Thank you. Yeah, this is such a fascinating history. I wanted to kind of link some of this. Oh, we have a question from Ned. I'll ask this one and then we'll move to Ned's question. My question was going to be about another chapter, but is somewhat linked to this because you talk about how in this early days of the colonial period, the Bengali middle-class Bhadralok people are linking Mughal cuisines with English food. And you have a quotation in the book that says something like from one of these local Bengalis that people are adopting this unpalatable English food. And then he goes along to list all sorts of Lucknowi specialties like pulao. And then again, they end up adopting this and it gets enshrined in the cookbooks. So really what I wanted to ask you about is these cookbooks. So I want to know like how your research went when you were looking at the cookbooks, which they often seem to be aimed at an up-and-coming housewife. So not the established matriarch of the household, but the new daughters-in-law who maybe want to make their mark in the household. And they're like instruction manuals on how to be a good middle-class woman through the medium of food from, I think, the early 19th century up through even your own education in school in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, can you talk a little bit about that history?
See, the cookbooks are a fascinating world. And because the cookbooks happened, we also get to know a little bit of the earlier food of medieval times, because references of the first cookbook writer, Biprodash Mukhopadhyay, who takes in several sources to create his books. It's interesting, actually. You see the mind of the author in the cookbooks. You also see a split in the mind. You see the author at one level trying to cater to the growing market of the newly educated English educated women who are able to read and write, right, and who would be interested in replicating and cooking a experimental dish for her husband or for her in-laws to impress them. And then you have a range of Biprodash's instruction, which also comes in saying that, okay, you cannot use a certain vegetable or a certain spice. He has very objectionable kind of a, in current day, it would seem very objectionable thought about garlic. He says that garlic is a very pungent thing you cannot use as a Hindu and things like that. So that is the kind of a thought process which goes into two ends. I find it's very, at times it can be very self-contradictory. Then you have somebody like Proga Sundari Devi who continuously counters the Mughal version of things and then brings in so many things which are actually recognizing the foreign influences. Although she keeps telling continuously that cooking is a dying art, cooking is a lost art, it was always there in ancient India. And then you have, then you see her endorsing pressure cooker, which is a completely new technology and a new scientific technology, which she says that in one of her editions, she says that you can cook in a ICMI pressure cooker because it cuts the time of cooking, it cuts down the time of cooking, and it's a modern gadget, and she kind of advises everyone to make use of it. So I think cookbooks had a two-way influence. One, from the authors to the readers, and also the journals, not only cookbooks, the journals and the magazines which were published at that point of time, where women were invited to contribute recipes. So they would come up with recipes, which to me is one of the most fascinating in history of Bengali food, because when you develop a recipe, you are mindful to something which is your own. So in a way, there would be many women who actually invented a particular dish, but they were never acknowledged. So all these magazines and journals, what they collected in different issues, in different seasonal or annual numbers, also had recipe developers in modern day. In modern sense of the term, which we don't realize at that point of time, but you actually, the cookbooks lead to the growth of recipe developers in their own little way, contributing to these journals. Also, it means for me that a woman takes the initiative to step out of her housewife duties, quote unquote duties of her housewife, and to spend some time with herself so that she can concentrate and be mindful in developing something. So it's that little creator self of a young girl who is newly married and who, I mean, in today's term, she could be a content developer or something for food handles all over the Instagram. But we don't recognize them in that way. But I think this is one of the most beautiful and one of the most interesting aspects of the cookbooks and its influences on the women. And I acknowledge the women at the end of my book. As I move towards the end, I tell the readers that it's finally the women who actually allowed this food to get into their everyday lives.
Thank you so much. So I'll read the question that Ned has posted. Ned's a professor of history here at UH, and he studies both in India and in other places in the Indian Ocean region. His question, he says, what a fascinating and delectable book. Did partition have any impact on the food culture of Kolkata? Since the story of Bengali cuisine is one of many different influences coming together, I was wondering about the opposite as well. What about the politics of separation and migration and what effect they had on Kolkata's food?
Oh, of course, partition is something which has impacted generations. And only yesterday there was a discussion that I had with someone who teaches in an university in Washington, and we were talking that we do have huge impact of partition. One of the most important influences of partition is that we were cut off geographically from the more fertile side of Bengal, fertile geographical areas of Bengal. In undivided Bengal, Borishal, which is in present-day Bangladesh, was the granary of ice. So Bengal being a region where people are dependent on rice, and then of course, the lack of rice, the most tangible and the most devastating example would be closer to partition in the 1943 famine. The famine pushed and created, in today's understanding, mostly by Winston Churchill's policy, etc., is also something which trailed the impact of the famine, trailed through the partition. 4 years was nothing. The intermittent 4 years was, it isn't enough time to recover. So there was a huge suffering of being separated from your friends, relatives, from what you consider to be your homeland, and the kind of vegetables, the kind of fish that you had access in when the Bengal was undivided. So obviously there are river boundaries, there are borders across the river. So certain kind of things were not available in this part of Bengal. Certain kind of food got omitted from our lives. And in fact, there is an example of a transit food, which is Goalando steamer chicken curry, which is Goalando is a juncture through which the commuters used to head off to the eastern part of Bengal. So in fact, if any of you would be interested in seeing the effect of partition cinematically, you may look into Ritik Ghatak's films, who is one of the most prominent Bengali film makers of the time, contemporary to Satyajit Ray. And each and every film almost depicts the emotional impact, the absolutely unbearable emotional impact of partition on the Bengalis. I see it in the food, the general poverty which was post-partition and time, which reflected in the lives of middle class, lower middle class Bengalis, and the refugee life. Here, one very important thing I must share, and this is not in the book, but I would like to share this with you. In undivided Bengal, in winter, we prepare several kind of sweet dishes, mostly made of rice, grated coconut, molasses, and these are sweet dishes which you could consider as sweetened spring roll, tarts, pancakes, similar to that kind of. The nature of the sweets, we call it, it has a generic term called pithe, Pithe. So when partition happened, and there was a new kind of pithe which emerged due to the financial crisis and the suffering of the people. It's called Bastuhara pithe. Bastuhara in Bengali means one who has lost his home, unhoused or homeless, as you would say in a more common understanding. So that kind of pithe will not have the stuffing, because there was so much financial crisis, so much of poverty, so much of hunger, that women used to pan fry and make this little sweet dish, but it had a lack of the stuffing, which used to be coconut grating or condensed milk, things like that. So we would consider those grated coconut and condensed milk and the khoa or the milk cream as elements of luxury. which were stripped, or abundance, more than luxury, I would say abundance, which got stripped away from because of partition, which left our lives. It took people at least 2 to 3 decades who were given places to live in the present day Kolkata to come back to their financial strength, to get back into a certain sense of financial rebuilding. And I think food impacted big time. Food was impacted big time. A small change also happened. Eastern part of Bengal is extremely fond of collard greens, with a plate of hot steamed rice, various kind of collard green in which is stir fried, often roasted, and a little basic collard green is mixed with rice and consumed. So those collard greens, many of them were not available in this side of Bengal. So that is, I have seen people regretting that, okay, we call it, it has a generic term of shak, S-H-A-K, which is in Nepal also. Oh, I think shak is consumed in a Nepali meal also. Not the conventional shag we pronounce it as shak, K-H, and it is various kinds of collard green, and the unavailability of it was a matter of crisis for the refugee population. So it's very, very, I mean, not only at the emotional level, but at the level of dietary pattern, they had to change things a lot, absolutely lot, because of the unavailability. In fact, I was talking to a friend whose mother is based in New York, and she's from Sylhet region of Bangladesh. And my friend was telling, absolutely sad. Every day she would be, when she would go to do her groceries and sometimes want to prepare a traditional Bangladeshi meal and would not find the right fish with which she would make it. So she's always looking for alternatives in the United States.
Thank you. And thanks from Ned here as well in the chat. That brings
Thank you, Ned, for being around. We are connected in the social media, so I'm so happy that he could make some time.
Absolutely. That brought me back to another discussion that you have in the book of Another Time of Famine, where people were creative and that shaped the cuisine. You were talking about famine in earlier century in Lucknow, in Awadh and Bihar, and how that also shaped the creativity of cooks, which they then brought to Calcutta. Is that right?
Yes, I mentioned about a legendary, I mean, it's almost like a part of the oral history of where Asafudullah says, जिसे कुछ ना देगा खुदा उसे असफुद्दुल्ला देगा. So means if the God doesn't be kind on you and bestow you with food and all I mean, Asafudullah will be your provider. He vouches for providing food, and that point of time, and during that famine, which is unthinkable at this point of time, that he comes up with the idea of a mosque project, where he actually employs is a lot of workforce, because then the royal administration can take care of the food of the workers. And that is the time also when the chefs were, I mean, they scouted for everything that they can use in their cooking, right from immense number of spices and unconventional leaves, shoots, all kind of things. They wanted to experiment and see what could be a suitable alternate to meat dishes, because there was huge famine, the crisis was impacting the polity and the local people, and they were very worried. So they were coming with innovations. So famine also allows you to innovate, to think what could, I mean, your food becomes, goes on a survivor mode, but by that you also come up with some interesting innovation. So I personally, about that sweet thing which I shared, which is Basuhara Pithe, I was shocked that how much was the poverty and the hunger that the women came with that innovation, that they will still pan fry and make a spring roll all of the rice flour or the whole flour or the maida, but there will be no stuffing because they couldn't afford a stuffing.
Yeah, that's a really poignant example, both of their creativity and their will to live, their will to go on, even in the direst of circumstances. And then at the same time, you imagine that empty middle of the spring roll as also of the hara, the lack of the home. It's so moving.
It is moving. It is indeed moving. I miss those spring rolls. My paternal grandmother used to be absolutely mind-blowing. I have mentioned her in my acknowledgement and how her food had influence. And my ancestry goes back 3-4 generations in Bangladesh. So northern Bangladesh in Mymensingh. And I actually miss that pan roll because that is something tedious which contemporary women may not be interested to make in Kolkata nowadays, and it's now commercially available in sweet shops and some eateries. So,
let's see, we have a little bit of time left. I want to make sure if anyone besides me has other questions and you want to ask them live and speak up, you do have the time to do so. Also, please put them in the chat as well if you'd like.
I think there was some messages coming in. We can check the...
Yeah, they're saying that they have to go, and thank you so much.
Oh my, thank you so much. So lovely to have everybody here. If there is any specific question, I'm most happy to answer them.
Hi, I don't have a question, but thank you. I'm a Bengali, so I understand. But when you live in America for so long, we kind of forget a lot of our own history.
So did you find something interesting in this discussion? Did you find something which made you recall about your home or about your...
Yeah, I mean, I love cooking. I cook a lot, but I just don't like washing dishes. So I cook a lot, and every night I call my mom or sister and get the recipe, what they're eating, and I try to do it here in Hawaii. So yeah, are you based in Calcutta or?
No, I am based between Philadelphia and Bombay.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Wow.
so I think you should get a copy of the book, and you should see if you find any recipes which you have tasted as a young lady in your school days maybe, or if you have any remembrances of this particular food being cooked at your home.
Yeah, sure. We also mix because my husband is like European American, so he has his recipe. So it's like a mixture of food, and I realize a lot of food doesn't match probably what my grandmother used to eat or my uncle aunt. It's different because like we live in an international community, so it changes. Food habit also changes how we travel.
Food habit changes, and I think ingredients, availability of the ingredients also make people think that what they can come up with the existing supply of the ingredients. As I was saying, that my friend's mother is always looking out for her traditional fish or the traditional collard green, but eventually she has to make do with what is the nearest to her taste and to her experience of cooking that particular dish. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you too.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, we could continue discussing with many, many different questions for a long time, I'm sure. But I believe we should wrap up now, sadly. And I want to thank Nilosree so much for giving us her time and all of her insights about what she wrote in the book and beyond, from her personal experience to her other insights that she's gathered. And we have 2 more up and coming events that I just want to let you all know about. One will be in person on next Tuesday, the 7th. A talk on the Bhagavad Gita will be given by Stu Gray here in person in the Tokioka room. And then coming up on the 10th, another lunchtime Zoom seminar will be another book talk by Dr. Barbara Nimri Aziz on Yogmaya and Durga Devi, 2 rebel women of Nepal, which will be a critical feminist look at the study of women in South Asian history. So if you're interested, please follow us on social media. Saloni will be making beautiful posts about everything. And once again, thank you very, very much, Nilosree, for a fantastic talk and a fantastic book. I loved reading it. I've put the link to order it in the chat. And also you can see we will be advertising it along with this recording of the video on our own social media on the YouTube channel of the Center for South Asian Studies. So thank you also to everybody who's stuck around for the duration of the webinar. Thanks so much for your participation and attention.
Thank you so much, Anna, for having me. And I'm so happy that whoever stayed back or whoever spent a chunkier time here for listening to me and for enjoying the history of Bengali food. I hope some of you will get a copy of the book, and more than that, you will also try and find out where is the nearest Bengali restaurant.
Maybe they can
Thank you
all
so
go
much.
in our friends' kitchens.
Of course. I really, really hope that everybody tries Bengali food. It's such an amazing cuisine.